Wonderful. Well, now we're ready to move on to wildfires. So we have Jenna here to share lots of information on Oregon wildfires.
Thank you, Kate. Okay, so I'm going to start my presentation here, just to start the way that we always do at ODF, which is the update on what's going on with fire right now. So I looked it up when I got here, and as of 42 minutes ago, milepost 97 fire, which is in Douglas County, is 95% contained, and we're at 13,119 acres. So that was a very significant fire, and hopefully we'll get it all wrapped up here soon and be able to kind of move on to the next steps. So just wanted to give everybody a quick update because that's what we do at ODF is talk fire all day long. So just to kind of start out, I wanted to give you guys kind of an understanding of what kind of numbers we're dealing with. Now, I sent these numbers over to these guys on July 22nd. Since then, we have had more happen and significant changes in these numbers. So I'm going to actually give you the up-to-date as of today, what our numbers are, and kind of there's a point to this. So as you can see, as of today, we're actually looking at lightning count of 147 lightning strikes that have started fires, and that's hit us at 117 acres-ish. And then as of human-caused fires, we have 502 as of this year, and we're now at 14,816 acres, which is obviously very different than the number I have up on the presentation, and that's only a couple of weeks ago. So fire can hit quick, and it can hit fast, and it can be human-caused. And the good news is when it's human-caused, it's preventable. So that's kind of the point that we like to make is that, you know, lightning does start fires and it is a concern for us, but the human-caused counts are generally much higher than our lightning-caused fires. So that prevention, mitigation, education piece is incredibly important and something that we really push in our agency to make sure people realize that there's a lot that you can do, and that goes back to safety, education, and understanding what can you do to be more fire safe. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when we're in here. So one more kind of quick statistic, looking at weather, because of course we're dealing with weather when we talk about wildfire a lot. As you can see, these are kind of projections for what wildfire season's looking like. Normal significant large fire potential is kind of expected across the region, except for west of the Cascadia Crest. Through August, where then like above normal significant large wildfire potential is expected. Now we've kind of had an interesting start with Oregon where it's been sort of this moderate weather. I know you guys are looking outside some of these days and you're like, oh, it just rained. What's going on here? Which is excellent. But what that's doing is just kind of creating a slower start to our fire season. We still expect those above normal heating that's going to come kind of later in the season. And as you can see, it's already started a very large fire in Douglas County. So just kind of keep that in mind. This is just sort of a projection and giving you guys an idea of what we're looking at for this fire season. So as to prevention and mitigation, which are actually two very different things, prevention is trying to stop it from ever happening, and mitigation is minimizing the impacts once it does happen. Mitigation is a really big piece. Prevention really is kind of the education side of things, trying to get people to know what they can do to minimize their risk. So these are kind of our main sources of prevention programs that the state utilizes. Firewise USA, which is actually ran by NFPA, and they are a global self-funded nonprofit organization. And so we take information from Firewise USA, and other fire departments can actually do this as well. And they can implement these programs on the ground as an outreach, education, prevention kind of program. Now, there's not necessarily funding associated to the Firewise USA program, though it can be utilized in grant funding, and it kind of is tied into some of these grant fundings. So I could talk all day long about grants with you guys, which you guys would be asleep within probably 10 minutes. But we do have grants. A couple of the main ones I just wanted to touch on is the Western States Fire Managers Grant and the Community Assistance Grant, which are only applied for through the state. Oregon Department of Forestry applies for these grants, and these do fuels reduction, mitigation on landowner properties, and potentially in Firewise communities if they're within kind of the grant area. And that's federal funding that comes through the state. Now, there's also Title III funding, which also does very similar things, and that comes through the county. So that's federal funding that goes to the county to do fuels reduction, mitigation type of activities. Not every county is applicable to utilize Title III, but if it is available in your county and you're interested in finding out more, I would reach out to the county and find out if they have Title III funding. There's also the Joint Chiefs. I'm just kind of throwing it out there. This is another program that the federal government utilizes for funding, and this is kind of a more landscape scale type of funding that addresses forest health along with the kind of fuels reduction piece, and those are kind of specifically just in areas that the feds have decided they want to put money down on the ground. That's not anything we compete to get financially. And then lastly is the Defensible Space Law. Many of you know this as the SB 360. This has to be adopted by a county, even though it's a law for Oregon that was passed, it has to be adopted by the county before they can kind of reach out to landowners to get them on board to do the work and get certified. And what that does is it alleviates some of the costs to the landowner if a fire were to start on their property if they're part of the certified program. And so this isn't super active in all counties, just a couple of them are kind of really active with this. So just kind of an overview of what we do to do mitigation at the higher level. Now on the lower kind of on boots on the ground level, what can you guys do type of thing? Firewise USA is really the best program that we use to kind of get that education and outreach information out to people. They deal with zoning essentially around your house, not the fancy kind of zoning, but the zoning like within 5 feet of your house, within 30 feet of your house, within 100 to 200 feet of your home, and the things that you can look at as a landowner to minimize your risk. And it has been shown that these type of principles and the things that they recommend through the Firewise USA program are effective in minimizing your risk to having damage to your house and your property if a wildfire were to come through. And the biggest piece about this is to recognize that you do not have to have a wildfire go into your home area in order to catch it on fire. Embers from a wildfire can travel miles from the fire, and they can land in like a little bit of debris that's just sitting in the corner next to your house that's got wood siding, and all of a sudden your home is up in flames. Right, exactly. Eagle Creek, same thing. Yeah. So and Paradise Fire is a huge one, of course, that people have had a lot of conversation about, and something to touch on with the Paradise Fire. So the Paradise Fire was considered started by the power company, obviously not on purpose, but that started, the sparks from the electric company started the fire, and then it spread, and part of that had to do with kind of the layout of that particular community and how the houses ignited each other, essentially. So in regards to kind of how the homes were built there's not a lot you can do about that. Firewise does teach principles on what you can do around your home to minimize your risk from catching from any kind of ignition sources. But in regards to now the power companies have been reaching out to ODF because of the Paradise Fire and kind of saying, well, what can we do to help not let this kind of thing happen in Oregon or again? And they've been incredibly proactive, and they're working really collaboratively with us. And really their thoughts on it are, how can we detect it sooner so that it doesn't spread? And so they're kind of working with us on what kind of better detection we can have, and then also the dispatching side, like sharing maybe some sort of dispatching so that we can make sure we get to those fires that are started through power lines earlier and quicker, and especially in high-risk areas. So that's kind of a piece that we're really working on right now with them. And they're just being awesome about just trying to learn as much as they can because they don't want another Paradise Fire to happen, especially in Oregon. So that's another piece of it. But Firewise USA has a lot of information. We've got resources that Kevin is going to give you guys after this. That's going to give you some information from them. But really, a Firewise community is a community that is working towards reducing their risk, and they work with the technical expertise of either the fire department or the Oregon Department of Forestry to do kind of an assessment of the community, and then they work kind of self-empowered every year to manage their own fire risk and address issues. So this is really a kind of the financial benefit to that, is having a whole group, a whole entire community that's on board with minimizing their risk, of course, then increases your chance of surviving a wildfire. So the next piece is, what do you do during a wildfire? So that's kind of the prevention pre-work that you're doing, is the Firewise type of principles. During a wildfire, we have the Ready, Set, Go program. This is not an Oregon Department of Forestry program itself, but it's kind of goes in conjunction with what we do. Really, your local county sheriff's office is going to be the ones who are, ordering that evacuations. So if you feel concerned, I would say get out early. If you're worried about it and you want to get out early, do it. But if not, then they kind of have a Ready, Set, Go program. This kind of ties back into what Althea was talking about in regards to being ready, packing your valuables. And they say, go with the P's. Make sure you get the people, of course, the pets, personal computer, prescriptions, like you were talking about, paperwork, pictures, phones, your credit cards, anything that's important. I highly recommend creating a list and sticking it on your fridge because in the middle of a wildfire, you are not thinking clearly. You're just grabbing whatever is around you. And so those valuables and things that you won't think of in that moment, you want to have that written down somewhere that's just quick and easy to look at. I was actually watching a video of a gentleman who was talking about how he was in the wildfire, and his wife called him and was saying, get the stuff and get out. And so he started frantically looking around, and he's grabbing the kitty litter and he's grabbing the animals, and he just completely forgot all of the, the historical important things that, like her grandma's, favorite quilt that they had, sort of things like that. So just remember, you're not going to be thinking clearly, and you don't know who's going to be home. If it's your spouse or who the neighbors are going over to grab your stuff, if you don't have a to-go bag, having a list of the important things just sitting on your fridge is really important. So I highly recommend that. And then the set part is, of course, watching the news reports or getting in contact with your local fire department or those kind of things. Whoever is kind of in charge of getting that information to you, keep on top of it, and then go, once you get that knock on that door, do not wait and get out. So you've done everything you can hopefully prior to that to minimize your risk, and just get out. So there's more information on Ready, Set, Go on their website that I have listed at the bottom of that slide, but it should be in the resources piece that Kevin's gonna send out to you guys afterwards. So kind of this is another part of prevention, is the insurance piece. And I think you kind of touched on it a little bit, Kevin, but homeowner policies, now I'm not an expert in insurance, so we can defer to them if you have questions on this, but in regards to insurance, now there's more than one way that your insurance company can actually recognize your valuables, and one of them is what was the cost of them when you bought them versus what's the value of them today. So there's kind of different ways that they account for it. So keep in mind when you have that conversation with your insurance person, how are they accounting for the valuables that you're losing? Because you might have paid a whole bunch of money for something when you first bought it, and now the value is not as high. Are you going to get the current day value, or are you going to get the previous, or maybe it's the opposite? Maybe you bought something and it's increased in value over time.
Hey, Jenna, can I speak to that real quick?
Yeah, please.
So she brings up a really good point. So let's say you did have a loss. Your claims adjuster will come out and he'll write you a check for the actual cash value of that product. So let's say you have a 10-year-old television. What's that television worth today at a garage sale? Maybe $20. They'll write you a check for that a value of $20. How much would it cost to replace that today? About $1,000, right? Equivalent kind of television. So once you replace it, you'll get the rest of the money. So people often get kind of, little bent out of shape when they get that first check, like this isn't enough and I have replacement cost coverage on my policy. It's coming. Claims adjusters are usually not great about telling people that there's going to be additional checks coming, and making sure that you have replacement costs is very important.
Yeah, so just, having that conversation and knowing what you're getting yourself into with your insurance company. I mean, sometimes they have things in your packet that they send you, and of course you get this giant packet and you don't really read through it. Usually you're kind of setting it on the shelf and saying, cool, I've set up my insurance, but just being really aware of what exactly do they cover and how can you better cover yourself, essentially. So that's a huge piece. And then keeping that written inventory or taking the pictures, like you said, is really helpful. And having it outside of the home, obviously, if you have an inventory and you leave it in the home and it burns up in a fire, that is not useful to you. Right? So, just kind of keeping on top of those kind of things, making sure that you update your policy if you do a remodel or you do any kind of improvements to the home. Those are really huge pieces that you need to make sure that you get back in touch. Don't forget that part of it, to update them, because if you don't update them, then you may not get paid out for it. So just kind of understand your policy, know what it covers. So that was kind of the things that I wanted to cover. I could talk all day long about these things, but those are kind of just the highlights and the high level. If you have any questions, I have a lot of information in the back. These are really excellent, these little booklets. They kind of cover all of the pieces that I've talked to you about today. This is from the State Fire Marshal, kind of printed these up for us, but they did it in conjunction with the Oregon Department of Forestry. So a lot of these things are in there and you can look more into them. This is just really a brief overview of kind of what we're dealing with. And Jamie, she can cover anything in regards to if you have questions about kind of the smoke side of wildfire and the health. Well, I guess the health piece is essentially what she'll be covering. But any health effects and impacts of wildfire, of course, because we deal with the smoke impacts, even if we don't have the wildfire catching our house on fire. So
We would like to hear that answer. Jamie, tell us about the smoke impacts.
Yeah, so smoke is one of those things that can affect you when you're miles away as well, right? She had mentioned the embers float. Well, guess what? So does smoke. And we're primarily concerned about people who have pre-existing heart and lung disease. So think about asthma, COPD, emphysema, and very small children because of the way that their lungs work. Their airways are smaller, and so when the particles from smoke come in, it's harder for them to manage those. And we're really concerned about this thing called PM 2.5, and it's these really small particles that can get way deep in the lungs. And so the good news is you can reduce your exposure, and you can do that by staying indoors when it's smoky outside, and limiting your activity when you do have to be outdoors. So maybe instead of running, you go for a walk. Maybe instead of doing a hard cycle, you take it easy and just do the slow pace that you might do on your commute. And then you also want to keep your indoor air clean. So as we're talking about things that you might want to put on your list to purchase for preparedness, consider getting a HEPA filter. If it's not already on your heating and air conditioning system. Some heating and air conditioning systems actually already have those. So it may just be a matter of changing your filter in the summer. So I think, knowing that you can limit your exposure is really empowering. The one thing that you'll need to know is that DEQ, Forestry, and Oregon Health Authority run a blog together. It's called Smoke Blog. The Oregon Smoke Blog, sorry. And on there you can find the very first thing that you'll see is a very large map of what the air quality is in your area. And based on the air quality in your area, there's specific health recommendations. So green, air's great, do whatever you want outside. Moderate, some of those folks that have like asthma might want to pay a little more attention to their symptoms and address it if they need to. There's unhealthy for sensitive groups at the orange level, and so then certain groups really want to start dialing back their activity. Unhealthy means it's unhealthy for everybody, and everyone should take steps to minimize their exposure. So it's a really good tool for helping you make decisions. We also realize that not everyone has a monitor near them, and so if you click on the air quality index tab, they'll have more information about how to judge the air quality based on a visual scale. And then, of course, as Paradise occurred, we also really encourage folks to have a power plan, particularly if they're someone that's power dependent for medical reasons.
Thank you, Jamie. That was really helpful. Are HEPA filters easy to find?
They're especially easy to find if it's already on your furnace and heating and air conditioning system. You can find them at hardware stores, Walmart, Fred Meyer. They'll all have them. You just need to look for HEPA. And if you go to EPA, they'll have more information about HEPA filters and choosing the correct one. And then, if you don't have an heating and air conditioning system that you can just put a filter on already, you can purchase one. Those are usually room size, so you will need to pay attention to the dimensions of the space that you're using. And again, EPA has some really good information on how to select the filter that's right for you. The cost ranges. If there's a filter on your heating and air conditioning system, it might be $20-30 for a pack of 3, 6, something like that. The standalone room ones are a little bit more expensive, but if you have asthma and you think about the fact that you're buying this for wildfire smoke, there are other pollutants that have PM 2.5 in it, so it's really an investment for your year-round care. In the winter we have wood fire stoves that produce smoke. There's pollution from exhaust, so plenty of ways to protect yourself with a HEPA filter.
Thank you, Jamie. That's really helpful. One more question for the panel on the financial implications of fire. If you were to need to evacuate, Kevin, can your insurance help pay for evacuation expenses?
Yeah, this is actually one of the best kept secrets with insurance. The one thing that they don't ever tell you is that there's a little clause in your insurance policy, and this applies to all homeowners and renters policies, called additional living expenses for loss of use. So if there is a level 3 evacuation and you have to leave your home, even if your home isn't damaged at all, you can get access to additional living expenses. So if you have to stay in a hotel, it'll pay for the hotel. If you're eating out now, there's an additional cost to your groceries because you're eating out now. That additional cost would be covered by your insurance. If that hotel is 10 miles further from your office, that's 20 miles round trip, that's 20 miles of gas your insurance will pay for. The trick is just keeping track of all your receipts. And sometimes it's subject to deductible, so talk with your insurance company. So you have to, if you have a $500 deductible, you have to incur $500 of additional living expenses before they'll kick in. But not every policy is that way. But additional living expenses across the board is covered for everybody.
That is such a good tip, especially if your home isn't damaged. You might think, oh, I have no reason to file a claim.
Right, and it has to be for a covered peril too. So if you don't have flood insurance, well, flood insurance doesn't cover additional living expenses. But if it's a fire, it would cover that. If you have a chemical spill or something like that, it kind of can go either way depending on the policy. But definitely smoke and fire is a covered peril.
Great, thank you. We have time for a couple questions from the audience on wildfires. Any questions? Yes.
What type of mask would you recommend somebody wear if they're out and about?
That's a question we get every season. And I'm gonna precede that with some caveats because a lot of folks want to go straight for the mask and purchase it. There's a lot of limitations to those, and so take some time to learn about them. They won't work well if they're not properly fitted and tested, seal checked. Usually in an occupational setting, that's more available. I haven't seen vendors that will do fit testing to make sure that you've got the right size and a good seal. If there's not a good seal, it can kind of creep in around the edges and you have a false sense of security. You might think you're protected when you're not. So you might go out and exercise or something like that that puts you more at risk. Another limitation for gentlemen, Greg, you're right in front with your beard. If you have a beard, it's not going to seal properly and it won't work for you. They're not made in children's sizes. We see every year, I hear from folks around, our health officers around the state that see these respirators that are made for adults put onto children. They're not protected when you do that. And so take time to learn about respirators before you make the decision to buy one. If, in spite of the limitations, you choose to wear one, choose an N95 or P100 respirator. Keep in mind that these respirators only protect you from the particles. They do not protect you from any of the gases that could be in smoke. So again, there's another limitation to it. It doesn't fully protect you. So make sure that if you're using one, that you're also still limiting your activities, still staying indoors when you can, and taking those steps that we know are much more effective.
Wow, that was really eye-opening. Thank you.